Welcome to another vintage fishing reel service and repair video. In this episode, we're going to be working with a rather old reel, and some of you probably recognize this leather pouch and maybe know what's inside it. But what we have inside of here is a Pflueger, it's caught on this thing here, get off of there. A Pflueger Summit 1993 L. I don't know if you can see that on there. It's written up in here. At any rate, the date's between 1935 and 1941. But like a lot of these old reels, the knobs on the handle were made out of Bakelite, which becomes extremely brittle. In fact, this one is broken off entirely on this post here, and mostly on this post here. You can see that in this one it was sort of a brown, kind of a marblish looking colored Bakelite, and I got a really good deal on this and the rod that went with it. I think I paid $5 or $10 for it. It's just a beautiful, beautiful reel, and so it's a level wind too. So I don't want to have to spend as much as I paid for the reel to find and buy a whole new handle with the Bakelite intact. I don't care if it's, you know, a shelf queen, show queen. I just like to have it look pretty much like it did and function pretty much like it did. So I'm going to try to construct my own knob handles for this. And the problem is you can't really mold them and cast them even if you had one intact, because this post here that the knob goes on is pressed in, so you can't get this off, and there's a knob here so you can't slip it over. It had to be put on before they pressed this post in there. So the only way that you can really put a new one on without tearing this off and trying to figure out a way to rivet or post that back in is to custom mold one on there. Now these posts, as is the case with most crank handles, they don't move. They're pressed into place, but you got to have the knobs spin around that shaft. And if you just take some moldable epoxy and put it on there directly, it's going to stick to the shaft, and it's not going to move with your finger. It's not going to spin at all. So I thought, well, I've got to put some kind of movable sleeve on there around which I can add the epoxy, such that when the epoxy dries, it still slides around that post. And so the idea that I came up with is, so I went and I got it for free at the gas station. One of those skinny little straws that they give you to stir your coffee or whatever with. And I thought, boy, that should be just about the right diameter. So I cut a couple pieces that fit right in there. I don't want it perfectly this exact same length. I want a little, because the original ones, you could slide it up and down a little bit to get in there and oil it and so on and stuff. They weren't tight between this little cap here and the handle itself. There was a little distance, so I made it a little bit shorter than the total length. And then I thought, well, I could take an X-Acto knife, because you can't get this over the knob. That's the whole point, is that thing keeps all this stuff from sliding off. You can't fit it over, but this stuff is elastic enough that I can take an X-Acto knife, and this thing's getting dull, and slice down that straw longitudinally, and then if I can get it started, I can slink it on there, and so now that slides around when I turn the handle, and now I can mold or basically form my two-part epoxy putty into a handle knob. And I've got enough of the original here that I can kind of see in general what the morphology of the thing was. They're pretty skinny, and I can get an idea of the shape of the thing, and I can use that to mold something around here. So that's what I'm going to do next. So the material I'm using is for fossil restoration. It's put out by a company called Paleo Bond, and the material is called Paleo Sculpt. It comes in a resin and a hardener. It's like clay. You take equal amounts of each and knead it together. You've got plenty of time to work with it, and then hours later it hardens into extremely hard material. Now, you don't have to use this. I use this because I've got some around, but you can also use some of that stuff for boat repair and stuff, where you knead the two parts together and then it later hardens. But this is nice because it's already colored to be, basically I can make it sort of a light brown, which is going to match the color on that Pflueger 1993L. Okay, so I've got two little spheres of the material here, about equal in size and volume, and so you just start kneading that together until it's thoroughly mixed. So as that gray begins to mix with the brown, it'll become a little bit lighter in color. And I'm pretty sure this is going to set up regardless, but if you'll notice, I didn't fully mix it, so it's kind of got a swirl color to it, and I think I'm going to leave it like that, and hopefully it sets up fully. I think it will, to kind of mimic the swirl pattern that was in the original Bakelite. So I'm going to take some of this material and begin to form it around that straw. And of course, with that straw being there, it's going to spin the way it's supposed to. And the hard part is getting it shaped so that it looks something like the original knob. But right now we just want to get our material on there so that we can start sculpting it. And I get some satisfaction out of maintaining the original handle on here. It may not have the original knobs, but I'm not putting a handle from a different reel onto this reel. I'm maintaining the original character of the thing, or at least the original handle. And this stuff you can soften with water, and so until it sets up, it is soluble in water. So if it starts getting sticky or whatever, you can wet your fingers and so on and so forth, and that'll loosen things up a little bit. So there's some tools that you can get for working with clay and polymer clay and so on to help form the thing. And I'm doing this for the first time, so I'm learning pretty much as I go here. I'm always wanted to try this, never have, So here I am, right in front of you, learning as I go. Now if I just wanted it to be functional and nothing else, I could just leave it like that. But I'd like to get it shaped more or less like the original handle was. I'm just trying to get the ends nice and flat. Okay, so that's where I'm gonna end with the it took me a while to get those sort of formed. I kind of did a little bit of sculpting before it's set, just to get the general sort of hourglass shape, but there's not much more you can do without really goofing it up. So want to make sure that there's none of the epoxy touching anything other than the straw, but I'll let that set up, and then I can smooth and maybe do some final shaping after it sets up with a Dremel tool and some sandpaper and so on and so forth. But even if I ended just like this, it doesn't look half bad. You'd never know, probably, unless you really started looking closely. But so it is, once it sets up, it will be functional, but it's just a matter of trying to shape those to look a little bit similar to the original anyway. So we'll see how that goes. We'll let this set up and go from there. Okay, this is mostly set up, so it's hard now. Might not be as hard as it will ultimately get with a few more hours, but that's okay, because when I'm doing the coarse sanding, it's probably going to be a little easier to sand if it's not fully hard as a rock. This stuff can be kind of hard to sand when it's fully set up. Not terrible, but just harder. But so I've started sanding a little bit off video just to kind of get this diameter consistent around there. You can see some areas are a little skinnier than others. So I mean, right now it's just all about cosmetics. I mean, the thing is totally functional. Right now it's just about cosmetics. So I've got about 120 grit sandpaper here right now, and it was very helpful to try to get the shape is pretty much good while it was still soft, because trying to shape it, I mean, you can use an X-Acto on this, especially if it's not fully set up, if it's just hard but hasn't reached its full hardness. So you can do a little carving with it, but then you have to be really careful, because if you cut too deep, then you're going to have to go back and add more material on and let that set up, and then go back, and so on and so forth. So I'm glad that I at least got sort of that hourglass shape going while it was still soft. So once I've got this formed in a very coarse way with the coarse sandpaper, then I'll go ahead and do the fine sanding. You can kind of see where there are divots when you sand it. You know, those are going to be the dark areas, and then you can continue sanding until it lightens up, and that indicates that you've kind of smoothed out those divots and made a nice smooth transition in the shape. So you don't need to see me do all this coarse sanding. you get the idea. So I'm going to shut the camera off and come back and when I'm ready to do the fine sanding. Okay, moving on to 220. I'm just going to keep working up, or into finer and finer grits. Smoothing out the scratches from the previous grits, and until I get it really smooth, and then probably I'll put some kind of a clear enamel coating on there so that it shines like the original Bakelite and has a nice feel to it. So I'll continue with 220 and be back. Okay, I've gone up to 1200 on the sandpaper, and doesn't look too bad. I mean, it's not perfect, but I think some of the minor blemishes will go away with the lacquer. But you can see some sort of swirls in there, similar to the original swirling in the Bakelite. But yeah, we'll get some lacquer on there, or probably just use clear fingernail polish and see how it looks. Okay, so the fingernail polish is dry and it's got a nice luster to it. Color doesn't match the original perfectly, but it's brown. If you look really closely, it has a swirl pattern in there, and it works. I mean, they spin on there really nicely. It's very comfortable and functional. And of course, the original, I'm trying to see if that little piece is still around here. I don't see it. The original Bakelite handle had a groove right in there. It went all the way around, and I thought about taking a O-ring and sliding it up there and then tracing around that and then trying to file a groove in there. But I thought, you know what, this is my first time doing this, and I don't really want to mess it up, because if that groove isn't perfectly straight, it's going to look like an even worse hack job. So this doesn't look too bad. If you didn't know any better, you would think those were, if you weren't really familiar with the knobs on a Pflueger Summit 1993L from 1935 to 1941, you wouldn't necessarily even think twice about those not being original. They have luster, they've got the similar color, they've got the swirl pattern, and they're very functional. So this is an idea that I had a long time ago, and I've always tried to figure out, how could I do that and make them spin without having to take those posts off and finding a way to press them back on there and this and that. So this is what I came up with. Maybe others have come up with it also, I don't know. Maybe I just reinvented the wheel, but I'm happy because I've got some old Shakespeare's with the brittle Bakelite where I've gotten a good deal on the reel, and I got the good deal because the knob was broken, the Bakelite was broken. So now I can go and fix those up. Of course, if you have something that's white, you can just paint it white, mask it off and paint it white, put some lacquer on it, and there you go. So hope you enjoyed that, and hopefully if you have a broken knob that you'd like to sculpt a new one, that gives you something to go on. And so I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.